flares. The great hunt begins.
As I'm well into my way through Marvel's Spider-Man 2, I found myself clinging to the side of a Manhattan skyscraper. It was a nondescript office block, made of limestone and granite, a few streets over from the Empire State Building in the borough's Midtown district, illuminated by the low sun reflecting off the nearby Hudson River. I was between missions, and despite a new main quest map marker pointing me in the direction of Queens across the water, I was lost in the moment, peering into the cluttered workspace of an unassuming civilian on the opposite side of the glass. By now, it should go without saying that Insomniac Games knows a thing or two about superhero spectacle. Our Marvel Spider-Man review billed Peter Parker's maiden voyage under this developer's care as about as good as superhero gaming gets. Fast forward 5 years in a new console generation, and I can say with absolute certainty that Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is as good as superhero gaming gets. It's the quintessential costume caper, larger than life in more ways than one, and whose blockbuster boss battles and mob-fighting forays have set new standards in not just superhero games, but AAA action-adventure games in general moving forward. Marvel's Spider-Man 2's busiest moments, though, are accentuated by its quietest. The Manhattan map of the original 2018 outing was a triumph in open-world design, but that game's bustling thoroughfares and scaled interpretations of NYC's busiest tourist spots feel empty in comparison to its exclusively PS5-powered sequel. Here, we're seeing the true potential of Sony's cutting-edge hardware, spread across an enhanced version of Manhattan and Harlem, as well as Brooklyn, Queens, and Coney Island for the very first time. In practice, this means more yellow cabs slouching down Fifth Avenue at rush hour, more holidaymakers snapping selfies at Times Square, and as evidenced by my offhand nosiness above, more subtle suggestions that this virtual sprawl is alive away from the action. The idea that a video game setting can be so well designed that it can be considered a central character is a well-worn cliché, but I genuinely can't think of any game I've ever played in recent years where the assertion is more true. In Marvel's Spider-Man 2, every journey to and from each breakneck action set piece feels satisfying, it feels credible, it feels almost real, despite the fact that, you're dressed in increasingly outlandish spandex costumes and shooting fake spiderwebs from devices attached to your wrists en route to fight a giant man made of literal sand. And of course, while Marvel's Spider-Man 2 shines in its downtime, it absolutely thrives in its moments of carnage. That's likely best showcased when the game's duo of Spider-Men, Peter Parker and Miles Morales, join forces in the throes of fast and furious combat. Following his support act appearance in the first Marvel Spider-Man, Miles Morales was treated to a full-fledged spin-off in 2020, an expansion that further explored the character's unique story and style. In Marvel's Spider-Man 2, however, both Peter and Miles are fully playable characters, each with their own stakes in the overarching central narrative, and each with their own tailored offshoot side quests. Outside of core missions, switching involves swiping left on the DualSense touchpad and selecting subquests dedicated to each character, hitting X, and watching a quick fade-to-black transition change things up almost instantly. When teamed up in combat, you'll control one Spider-Man with the other offering AI support, either locking horns with individual enemies elsewhere in whichever conflict you've wound up in this time, or assisting in picture-perfect slow-motion double-team takedowns. Surviving these hectic wave-based battle royales requires fast reflexes, flitting between attacks with the square button, dodging with circle, and pulling yourself towards the nearest enemy with triangle, and executing special abilities at the perfect moment. Unlike the first game, these abilities are no longer tied to specific suits, but are instead assigned via the pause menu. Mixing and matching your favorites is essential in ascertaining what works best and is most effective for you, as is strategizing the order in which you perform them. My own preferred Miles combo, for example, saw me kick things off with a blast of reverse flux that floored enemies, before quickly doubling down with a hit of chain lightning. This, more often than not, weeded out the weakest enemies of the pack, which let me then follow up on the big guns with Thunderburst and Galvanize. The first, a devastating area of effect maneuver. The second, a focused blow that sends one enemy airborne, while also dealing nearby enemies damage too. A cooldown timer governs all of the above, underlining the importance of timing in battle, whereas regular attacks build your focus bar. Only after maxing that out can you either heal or enact the aforementioned slow-mo takedowns, either solo or with your spider pal in tow. A suite of skills, gadgets, and suit tech options likewise complement the more flexible combat systems, with improvements unlocked with skill points accrued by winning battles, and uncovering secrets out on the field. Peter and Miles each have their own individual traits that aid them in combat, while a third tier of shared, unlockable skills offer more generalized leg-ups, both in battle and while traversing New York City. The latter means of travel is now bolstered by the inclusion of a web-wing wingsuit that lets you glide through the skies at any height, as opposed to swinging from platforms above. This is especially helpful when making the journey over the East River towards Queens and Brooklyn, whereby catching wind tunnels, delineated on-screen by glowing rings, and updrafts around skyscrapers and industrial air vents helps to maintain aerial momentum, forcing a degree of light puzzle work in getting around that I enjoyed moment to moment. As it turns out, my only notable criticism of Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is tied to this very point. Despite being succinctly paced throughout its first and second acts, the game's third act struggles to maintain the same consistency in tension and momentum. That's not to say it lacks either, but similar to the likes of The Last of Us 2, there's a section towards the end where I was sure I was nearing the final scene before it lulled, then hit the roof, and dialed everything up to 11 from that point onto its climax. The choice puzzled me a little, but it's perhaps reflective of a wider issue pertaining to sequels in 2023, whereby value is unreasonable tied to the length of games, and wherein devs feel under pressure to go bigger and bolder at any cost. I'm speculating, of course, and all of this matters a lot less when a game like this backs it up with quality across the board. Through all of this, I reckon Marvel's Spider-Man 2 does something few game sequels are capable of. It feels fresh and new, innovative and expansive, and familiar and deferential all at once, constantly shocking and inspiring awe, all the while tilting its cap to decades of inspiration from one second to the next. PlayStation Studios and Insomniac Games' much-anticipated follow-up, then, is the result of years of evolution and iteration, both from Insomniac Games itself and within the wider superhero action-adventure genre. And it shows. Just about everything here is an improvement over the original game. The combat and gadgetry is a tangible, if sometimes shameless, homage to Rocksteady's Batman Arkham series. And the breakneck traversal is a tribute to anyone with a passing interest in the subject matter, or anyone else who's ever dreamt of saving the world or defying gravity by flying through the skies. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is quite simply the best superhero game yet. Don't forget to support the channel by buying our printable artwork from our Etsy shop. The link to that is in the description. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.